Welcome to the Spring 2021 Communication Arts Conference at Judson University. My name is Warren Anderson, and I'm the director of the DeMoss Center for Worship in the Performing Arts. We are here in Thompson Hall in the basement in Doc Ryder Studio B, and this is where we are doing our Communication Arts Conference again this year, virtually, as we did last fall. As for thank yous, let's go ahead and thank, first of all, Dr. Stuart Ryder, Professor Emeritus, and our Darkroom Studios patron. Thank you, Doc, for your continued benevolence to the Communication Arts Department, of which you were such a key founding member. We want to thank Jeff Flickema and his team with the Judson University production team. Thank you, Jeff. And to Professor Tim May, who is our Darkroom Studios manager, for all of the work that he is doing to pull this together as well. And we want to thank in advance the students who are giving their presentations, the communication arts students and the worship arts students, for what is going to be, I trust, a very wonderful series of presentations. Would you pray with me as we begin? Sovereign God, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. We are grateful that before time began as we understand it, you spoke this world into existence, setting in motion very clearly that communication is integral to your kingdom's work. And so we'd ask that you would bless these students as they present now. Give them a great sense of calm and of encouragement and of confidence that you will speak through them as they honor you by returning the gifts that you've given them to your service in this conference. We pray all of this in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Enjoy the presentations.
Hi, my name is Damaryan Benton, and this is Black Hair 101. Merriam-Webster defines hair as strands varying in length on top of the head. But to us, it means more, whether it's trends on media or what we define as more in our lives, such as culture or identity. It's a part of our lives more than we'd like it or not. But in my life, in my perspective, as a Black person in America, let's provide a new perspective. So today, first, we'll teach you some Black Hair 101. Then we'll go into learning some Black hair history. To lastly, examining its impact on youth of color and Black communities. So when we're young, we all go through this talk, the birds and the bees. And to make a long story short, they live happily ever after. But there's also another rendition to this story, the Black family edition. I like to call the birds and the weaves. And with this, it's pretty short and simple. When going to a hotel, the shampoo, it can happen there, as that's also called white people's shampoo, because my hair is not going near any of that. Or it can happen just in our regular lives, getting a haircut at the barbershop. For our men out there, we can have ingrown hairs in the back of our neck. And this is from the barber making the mistake of going against the grain. Now, this can mean nothing to you, as you may not understand. Or this is something on the regular all Black people go through. But let's start with a relaxer. A relaxer is what the girls call it, and for men, it's typically the S-curl kit. And what these do is for all our textures, mine being coarse, it relaxes our hair to be either straight for women, and for men, curly or having waves. And with this, it's applied with chemical, so you have to be safe. And as it's on your hair, you let it sink in to where it's washed out, and your hair is poof, magical, curly or with waves. Then there's the hot comb. That is for the girls to make their hair straight. Then you can see this helps with the braids and with beads for little girls. But with this, you can see that there's also a lot of stigma with this type. Is that your real hair? Is what typically comes with the price. And honestly, when we're asking this question, how is it not our hair? When women are spending thousands of dollars on this, it's their hair. They bought it. So don't ever ask that question again when it comes to mind. Or moving forward, we see in celebrities, the impact of influence. We're seeing so many wearing their natural hair. It's impactful for our young youth of color because they're seeing someone that looks like them with their type of hairstyle in the limelight to say that maybe I can do it too. To fast forward, we can see that while this is an important aspect of our lives, it's also a demeaning one. As we're going into our workplaces and into school, we are seeing differences apart our hair onto other people. A study done by Duke University, they took a fictional character and had her with natural hair versus straight hair. And I guess we can see who won there. It states, the group who saw a candidate with straight hair rated her as more professional, defined as more polished, refined, and respectable, and they more strongly recommended her for an interview. We see that the discrimination is even before getting into the workplace. In their evaluation, in their job interview, women are not choosing straight hair for personal choice, but feeling like they have to get equal treatment. That is what comes with the price. So what's the stigma? What is coming with our natural hair? I did a little experiment myself. In typing into Google, unprofessional hairstyles to avoid, what came up was a majority of Black women. While this was a hot button topic in 2016, it still remains today. Why is unprofessional ghetto tied to natural hair? A question without an answer. It's not inherent, but learned practices. Imagine a 16-year-old boy or girl typing into Google unprofessional hairstyles. And to not only see themselves, but their identity labeled as something to avoid. And we're wondering why Black people are less likely to apply to jobs. So, here's an example, if we're not fully understanding the point. Faith Finity, an 11-year-old girl, seen in her viral video posted by her mom, crying because she was sent home from school. Why? Her hair was deemed a distraction in the classroom. It's more than a label, a category, a stigma. It's affecting real lives. And no matter if it was a day, to be sent home from school due to a hair, due to identity, is traumatizing enough. But one statement she said still remains with me today. She said, "It was losing a part of me that helped me to be empowered by it." An 11-year-old girl. And I truly thought how it reflected on me. So how was all of this with my experience? In the pictures, you can see that as a baby, I had some hair. However, my mom decided to cut it. And when I was older, after seeing baby pictures, I asked her, "Why'd you cut my hair?" To which then she said, because it was too close in similarity to what my dad looked like. He was in gang violence, and he was shot and killed because of it. But I asked, dreadlocks and my dad's identity, what's the correlation? My mom said, "Well, I just didn't want any sort of way for you to get in any police violence. It's real life. Just you looking like that can get you killed." I was 15. That conversation from hair is real and not uncommon. So we can see that not only from my experience and looking at baby pictures, it can bring real trauma. To know that my mom had to feel scared to keep my hair like that because of society. But as we've seen throughout time, we find ways to empower ourselves. And in one movement, you can touch my hair. 3 girls decided to change it up, saying you can, because they want to help change the stigma, helping to educate people who are concerned or confused about the Black hairstyles. And in this movement, we can also see there's others than Black women joining the movement. Donald Trump seen here with his help from a woman to the side. And we can see throughout history that Black hair is unique throughout time, going back to the Black barbershop, as this was a place that was safe for the Black community to come together and really talk amongst each other. Because real issues like this aren't really understood in the real world. And this is even true now. Going into the Black barbershop, for me, is kind of a culture shock, being from the suburbs. But as I've gone, it's been a second home. So we can see that hair is big. But while big, can represent so much of who we are. But it's not entirely all about hair. It's more about what's within. So the next time you're seeing another person, truly ask yourself, how much is simply a hairstyle? Changing your opinion of them.
Very good, Damaryan. Thank you so much for sharing. Especially thank you for reaching into your past with the situation with your dad and being vulnerable and being willing to share that. That had to be a difficult conversation for you to have with your mom. It's been a few years now. Wounds scar over at some point. Would you have wanted her to handle that situation as you look back on it any differently? If you have a child in 30 years, 35 years, and that child is having a similar thing, was there anything about that conversation that you wish could be replayed at all?
That's a good question. I think I look back and am appreciative of how serious that conversation was. It could have been just laughed off or a quick push to the side, but I think it helped me realize how important a hairstyle can represent you. And as far as changing how the approach was, I wouldn't. I think for me, how I'm going to approach it is something of empowerment a little bit. I think my mom was kind of showcasing the fear of why she did it, and in a way kind of made me resent that she didn't trust that I could overcome that obstacle. But I think it's something to really evaluate and to see even now that my views are probably going to change even more later on when I'm having that conversation, or if I even need to in the future. But yeah, it's definitely a hard topic to portray to a 15-year-old or any age as a kid. So
yeah, for sure. As a young Black man, you articulate beautifully the aspect of African American hair. Are there other aspects of what we would consider as generalization, of course, but African American culture that are analogous to what you just shared with us about hair that you would love to inform the rest of the world about? Are there other issues about which you have no control, right? None of us can control our hair, right? That's a genetic makeup that it's God's gift to us. We can't say yes or no to it. Are there any other things that you've experienced that you'd like to say, well, so pay attention to what I just said about hair, but also maybe think about this too? Are there any things like that that you could articulate?
Speaking to my experience, I think what really struck me as different compared to peers were my first interviews. I noticed that, and I've always used S-curl kit. That's my hair now. This is not my natural hair type. I'm more of a coarse texture, so that's kind of Afro style. And noticing that we had to do mock interviews for Boys and Girls Club. And realizing that they were having real conversations with the other peers that were minorities that were showcasing their natural hair. And for me, it was a piece of cake going through that interview process. And then even going into the real world, I've never had a second thought of being scared that I'm going to be treated differently from a hairstyle or even who I am as a person due to, I think, my privilege in the suburbs. And I think just that whole perspective of where I've come from, and to hear from Black peers of that struggle is really eye-opening to know that you can still be, and it's really important, like how we look at race and how we can kind of oversimplify when it's so complex. But I would compare my experience to Black people altogether, and when hearing so many different experiences across the board over Black people, it ranges so much from environment to culture to upbringing. Yeah, it really opened my eyes to how a hairstyle, a voice, an appearance all make up kind of our stories pretty much.
Yeah. You mentioned the Black barbershop as a cultural, really an iconic kind of a cultural bastion of community. And even white folks have been informed a little bit in the recent movies, Coming to America movies with the scenes of the barbershop in there, and then of course the two movies that were called Barbershop, as I recall, with Ice Cube, if I'm remembering correctly. Tell me a little bit about your experience as a suburban young man getting into a stereotypical Black barbershop. What was it like? What did you take away from? What do you take away from those experiences? Just share a little bit about that.
Ooh, that was an experience. So I've always gone to a Black barbershop since I was young, but I think the social aspect of it hits you around your teenage years of like, I'm not fitting in here, or like, why is this feeling weird when these are my people? And I think it kind of showcased to me that you kind of forget how much you can learn from your own people. Like, in talking about my experiences before, oversimplifying it, thinking that my experience represents my entire community. But when going into the Black barbershop, I learned so much more about my culture that I kind of forgot that there's so much more to learn as I continue to grow. And I think in my first experience till now, I can definitely see just that comfortability. I explained that culture shock in the beginning of like, I do not fit in here. It's just not fitting. I'm not connecting well with these people. And like I said, and you can definitely attest to from papers I've written, that feeling of that disconnection from my culture because of society's deeming it as we discussed, unprofessional or ghetto. So the Black barbershop was kind of my way of instilling that empowerment of loving my Blackness. It was a combatingness of loving my Blackness, hating my Blackness, and having to face it head on. I think that was really how the Black barbershop really helped me in kind of self-love and understanding my culture more. That it's one place really can impact you, I guess.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Hi, my name is Nathan West, and my topic is on disability and inclusivity in worship. So one of the articles that I read before doing this presentation was they defined a different way to talk about people with disabilities. They talked about the people with and that they have disabilities. They have different abilities that they have and that they can bring, and some of them are decreased, and that actually may lead to people having increased abilities in other areas as well. So during this presentation, I will be going on off of what the Bible says about people with these disabilities, and I'll talk about general tips that we can use in the church for these, and then I will finish by talking about how we had this opportunity here to practice that here at Judson University. So in the Bible, in the beginning, God creates everything, and after He created everything, He said, God saw all of that he had made, and it was very good. His creation was perfect. Nothing was wrong in it until Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve both sinned. This is when the disability or difficulties started to manifest in all the creation, and this is where God's creation got corrupted. But God obviously didn't want that to be the only thing that we had left after we fell. And then he also influenced David to write a psalm, like, for these people with these difficulties to be able to, I guess, bring their cries to God and start to, like, actually feel like they can actually have a way to worship even with their difficulties. In Psalm 139, 13-16, David states, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." David wrote this psalm to help these people find comfort and find a way that they can actually praise God through their difficulties that happen because of sin. And one of the things that, like, I really love is, like, when he said, "Your eyes saw my unformed body, and all the days ordained for me were written in your book before one of them came to be." God knows what he's doing. God knows all about what you are going to be doing, even with what difficulties that you have, and he loves you the way you are, and you're perfect the way that you are. God also did not let us wallow in our sins and in our, like, self-doubt. Jesus came to earth as a baby, and he showed us what perfect life with community with the Father is like, and how we should be loving these people with difficulties. In certain points of the Bible during Jesus' ministry, he talked about how Jesus went and pursued after the people with disabilities outside of what people might think, like with the people who were blind, who couldn't move, who have, like, leprosy. Jesus pursued after these people, and for all the religious leaders and the disciples, they were all confused because they were like, "Why is Jesus talking with all these people who have these difficulties?" Because for them, it was like a sign of, like, this is their punishment for their sin or their parents' sin. And so Jesus came and showed how we should love these people with these difficulties in the church. And then Paul also in 1 Corinthians 12, he talks about how each person has their own part in the church, and how each of us have a part to play, even with our difficulties. So in this, Paul talks about how each part of the body has its own place and has its own space in the church that they need to fill. And then later on, he also states in verse 21, "The eye cannot say to the hand, 'I don't need you,' and the head cannot say to the feet, 'I don't need you.' On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and the parts that we think are less honorable we treat with special honor, and the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty." So each part has its own part to play, and even if we might think that they might not be as better that we are, God sees them as more than we are. God sees them as a part that needs to be in this church. And then some general tips that we can use to help bring these people into these areas and help them feel more included. The first one is be careful with first impressions. Each person has a different disability, and those might scale differently between each and every person. So just treat every person with their own person, and don't come with any prejudices, and get to know each person individually. And the next is build a social ramp, not just a wheelchair ramp. So even though people might have physical disabilities that that they need to have spaces for them to be able to come to worship. People also have mental disabilities and mental issues that they deal with the church, and that we also need to be building a social ramp and include them in everything that we do, so that they feel like they're included and they feel like that they are loved. And the next is ask and listen. These people know more about their disabilities or difficulties than any one of us do. So it's always important to ask them and actually listen to their story and listen to what they want us to have in the church. And also always keep in mind their caretakers, because this is a huge thing that they are dealing with, and they also have to help these people, and they love them and they need our support as well. And then one other thing that worship leaders can do is explore how to reach people of all abilities. So this is just finding areas that we can use to just have a universal design for worship that all people can be included in. And then the last two are kind of together, and they talk about how everybody belongs and everybody serves. So like Paul said, everybody has a space in his church, in Christ's church, and that we should be including them in whatever we do. And also, likewise, everybody serves. Everybody has a part, and that also includes them serving and being around other people who don't have difficulties, but even then, they still have their part in the church. And then also, in the Rise program, we have an opportunity here as worship leaders to start to learn how to include these people. And it's also amazing that we actually have this program here at Judson University that includes these Rise students who have these disabilities. And these people are really hungry for community with people without these, or with us normal students. And we also have this opportunity to learn how we can be intentional in developing these relationships. During the Rise Chapel this semester, they focus on Psalm 139 and how each of us are fearfully and wonderfully made. No matter what difficulty that we have, each one of these people have a purpose, and they got to share their stories about how they did that. And then also, these Rise students come to Upper Room basically every single night that we have it, and I've gotten to have these conversations with these Rise students that have been very intentional, and I feel like very helpful for them. In one conversation, I was kind of like, oh, I have to talk with you now? Okay. But then she's also been struggling with some other things, and so I feel like God gave me that opportunity to be able to help this person deal with that situation and speak His truth into that situation and help them to come out of that very well. So I've now shown you what the Bible has said about disabilities and some tips that we can use to help to include these people, and how at Judson University, us worship leaders have had the chance to be able to learn more about and put it into action to help to include these people.
All right. Thank you very much, Nathan. I appreciate it. Given that this presentation comes out of your senior seminar with Dr. Torgerson, I know that there are bibliographic requirements for this.
Yeah.
So could you give us the names of 2 or 3 authors or 2 or 3 books or journal articles or anything along those lines that if anyone's interested in following up on this, they could start to pursue? So who has helped inform your thoughts in this semester's study?
So one of the ones that I was talking about was the Making Spiritual Sense of Disability by Josephine Stoughton. And she was the one who talked about the disability. And that's where I got that from. And I just felt like that was a very good article that helped me get started about what people might think or what would want in the church. And also Andrea Parrott talked about one body and many abilities. Just talking about how 1 Corinthians and all of that. And also, where I got those tips from was from Grace Bruder from faithword.org, and that was one thing that is a very good general thing that you can go to.
Excellent. The late theologian Henry Nouwen, who actually spent a decent amount of time in his ministry working in a community of folks with pretty severe disabilities, as we described it at that time, wrote a profound book called The Wounded Healer, in which he acknowledged that sometimes the best people who are able to give the best care for others are people who have been wounded themselves. So much of the conversation when we talk about typically abled and differently abled, it seems as often is one directional. You typically abled people open up your doors and be more sensitive to people who are differently abled. But if we hold on to the idea that there are differences in ability, then the people who are differently abled probably need occasional exhortation to recognize what they have to contribute to the conversation. So talk just for a minute about what you would tell someone who is differently abled in order to encourage that person to recognize his or her vital contribution that is necessary if we're all going to be the church, capital C.
So with that Wright student that I was talking about, I would talk about how you see yourself differently than how other people see you. Because most of the time we are harder on ourselves than what people would say that we should be as harder on ourselves. And so it's just just be yourself. You are who God made you are, and that matters. And you need to be able to tell that story because people need to hear that as well. Because people might also have different issues that they might see in themselves that you get to speak into as well.
Final question. Give me one or two things that for yourself as a worship leader, your studies in the worship arts curriculum as related to this particular topic, how are you different now at the end of your junior year than you were when you came to us a couple of years ago?
I feel like my walk with God and just the theological things that I learned here has actually really helped me. I didn't realize how much I really needed that to be able to be a good worship leader. And so that's one thing that also helped me. And also just the community of worship leaders here has also gotten me to be more confident in myself and in my abilities with my musical and my speaking aspects as well.
Great. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate it.
My name is Jessica Windischman, and I will be talking about why multitasking is a myth. One day, I was having a conversation with one of my roommates, and she wanted to tell me this really funny story, so of course, I was all ears, except I wasn't. Because at the same time, I had just received a text message from someone else that was pretty important, so I was trying to come up with a reply to that as well. So my attention's divided, and I'm trying to pay attention to my friend while also trying to think of what the heck am I going to say on this text message. Well, long story short, I look up from my phone to see my friend look at me and say, "I know you have no idea what I just said because you have that look." You know, the look that somebody gives you when you know that they're not paying attention to what you're saying. I wear my emotions on my face, so I'm pretty guilty of this. Well, this whole trying to do two things at once was not working out for me. I just laughed and I told her I was sorry, but then I looked down at my phone only to see that what I attempted to try to write didn't make any sense. Has this been anyone else's experience before? Yeah, the amazing attempt at multitasking. Everybody does it, or tries to, but how many of us are actually good at achieving that top multitasker status? Well, some may argue that they're really good at it, but science would actually beg to differ. So I got really curious about this, and I wanted to kind of dig a little deeper. What is multitasking? What does science have to say about it? And what does it have to do with our brains? But first off, let's address what multitasking even is. If you didn't understand it from my amazing example, it's okay, I have a definition. Multitasking is essentially the performance of more than one task at a time. In our modern world, multitasking is commendable, almost something we strive to be able to achieve in the name of productivity. Specifically in the work world. It's like Rihanna likes to say, work, 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 work. Our culture's obsessed with work. We just pile things up until we have no choice but to do everything at once. Now, let me be real with you. This is me a lot of the time. I am a master procrastinator. I love to just save all my work to last minute until I eventually realize that I hate myself because I saved all my work to last minute. But we have this fear in our culture that having nothing to do equals not being productive. So sometimes I think we just like to make more work for ourselves. But to be fair, there are also times where we have no choice but to do a lot of things at once. Take stay-at-home working moms and dads. They do this all the time, and especially in the season of COVID, they've had no choice but to. I mean, a Zoom call with a screaming child in the back, I could not imagine, but it had to be done. Though, to that weird internal need we feel to multitask, I ask, why? Well, it's because we want to be doing something all while not wanting to do anything. To us, if we can tackle all our things at one time, it's like killing 5 birds with 1 stone, right? Actually, wrong. While we think we're able to be more productive, studies show that we actually end up losing productivity, and it takes us up to 40% longer to complete the tasks than if we were to have just done them separately in the first place. So let's go back to my example of me failing at this in my own life. If I had just listened to my friend's story, really paid attention, and then afterwards focused my energy on the text message, I would have saved myself so much time. Whereas with what actually happened is I had to have her stop, retell the story, refocus, delete the text message I tried to text, and then send it all again. But to understand this just a little more, we're going to have to do some brain surgery. Figuratively, don't worry. The part of the brain that is used when we're focusing on a certain task is called the prefrontal cortex. So scientific, I know. Both the left and the right sides of the prefrontal cortex are working together when we're focusing on a task. It's like they're partners. But you add on another task, and they begin to work independently, switching between the two sides. Your brain is working differently when you're just hanging out with your friends versus when you're writing a 10-page paper. Why? Because there's more focus. And when there's more focus, where the neurons are sending each other messages that are a lot more forceful and clear. But multitasking actually stresses this whole process and causes us to feel more mentally and physically exhausted. So, then what does science have to actually say about multitasking? Well, for one, I hate to break it to you, it's a myth. Your brain cannot actually work on multiple things at a time. It's all what I like to say a language illusion. So, while we like to say that we're rubbing our belly and patting our head at the same time, scientifically that's not what's happening. Earl Miller, a professor of neuroscience at MIT, puts it this way. Switching from task to task, you think you're actually paying attention to everything going on around you at the same time, but you're not. So the brain is forced to switch among multiple cognitive tasks, as those tasks all use the same part of the brain. So again, if you're visual like me, again, it's not rubbing your belly and patting your head at the same time. It's more like rubbing belly, then patting head, rubbing belly, then patting head, tongue twister. It's switching back and forth. But besides multitasking being a myth, scientists are also saying that there's a lot of potential pitfalls to trying to multitask. It can have a negative permanent impact on your brain structure and compromise your short-term memory, along with, again, affect your mental and physical health. But let me be real here. I know we're all going to leave here today. All of you that are watching out there, we're all going to try and multitask. It's just part of our nature, especially as college students. But we can see that it actually does a lot more harm than good. And while this started as a topic that I was really interested in, it made me realize the bigger issue we have in our culture, and that is that we don't know how to slow down. So I wanted to leave with an encouragement for us to just stop when we have a moment, take a second, and tackle one thing at a time. Because chances are that thing you're tackling, that you're focusing on, will end up being better than if you push 10 things on top of that too. And then, and this is really going to blow your mind, rest. Take a break. Allow yourself to breathe and refocus. And maybe if you're like me and you're having a conversation with your friend, listen to the conversation. Enjoy your time. There are a lot of things that are going to demand our attention. Some are going to be really important, others not as much. But we've lost sight of what it means to be present in the moment because we're so consumed with doing everything at one time. So yeah, let's stop. Let's laugh at our friends' stories. Let's take some walks, maybe even a nap. But if you're like me and those 10-minute naps turn into 3 hours, maybe don't do that. But let's change the way we strive to be productive, to view productivity. Because we don't have to overwhelm our lives just to prove that we can work hard.
All right, thank you, Jessica. Good stuff. No doubt a percentage of the people watching this video are multitasking even as they watch this.
Probably.
So they missed some of what you have said. I have no doubt. So provide as a coda to what you just said, a few practical steps, baby steps, that will help them achieve a few of the exhortations that you had in your concluding comments. You talked about rest, you talked about stopping. Okay, well, those are easy to hear.
Harder to do.
They're a lot harder to put into practice. So as Jessica is telling Jessica to stop and focus and rest, what practical steps have you found to be helpful that go just beyond, you should rest, you should rest.
Right.
Yeah, I know. Help me.
Yeah.
So help us.
So, I mean, like I was saying in my speech, I'm a master procrastinator, so I do this all the time. I'm preaching to the choir here to myself. But I would say that especially with this semester, I've been a lot better at trying to manage my time. Because like I was saying, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we either put off work or we just schedule so many things. We don't know how to say no sometimes too. So I think just being able to adapt a schedule and be practical with your time and say, okay, I'm gonna make sure that this moment of my day, I can get my work done so that I'm not scrambling till 4 a.m. to try and do everything else. I think it has a lot to do with just time management and just understanding your own schedule and being intentional about setting those times. I would say that's probably the biggest.
Excellent. Let's take it one step beyond that. So you said you're visual.
Yes.
So you're a visual learner. So as you think about managing your time, what things, take it one more step. What do you do? Is it a calendar on the wall? Is it pop-up notes on your computer? What's the next step?
Yeah.
Because I think you're right. I think managing your time is huge in this respect, but that too can be a little bit amorphous unless we put some handles on that. So how do you manage your time?
Well, going back
how should you manage your time?
Yes, going back to, because I'm visual, like you said, I think I've always tried to use planners, but sometimes I struggle with focusing like so far ahead, so like trying to plan everything ahead. So a lot of times I'll do like daily to-do lists too, which maybe is more effort for some people than others. But I like just knowing, okay, today, what do I have to do? What am I focusing on? And just like visually writing a to-do list and being able to like check it off. But planners I think are also good too, that you can kind of write down, okay, what do I have this month? What do I know like going up to this moment that I have to be prepared for this while also having this other stuff. So I think writing it down somewhere is really helpful. Even if you're not necessarily visual, just being able to know and see it. If it's just stuck in here all the time, it can be a lot easier to kind of just have it go past than if it's like in front of you. So definitely writing in a planner. I do to-do lists too. That's what I would say.
Theoretical question. Has the temptation to multitask been easier to manage or more difficult to manage during the pandemic?
I think...
And why?
For me personally, I think during the whole pandemic, I just had a whole bad habit of pushing a lot away because I just was like, this sucks and I don't want to acknowledge this. And so I'm just going to kind of push it away, which, I mean, ended up, you know, me not dealing with a lot of like the repercussions of that or what everything going on meant till later. And then it got kind of overwhelming. So I think it was, I don't know, it wasn't like multitasking with anything, or even just with my thoughts, just thinking about a bunch of things. I kind of pushed that away, so I didn't really multitask. I kind of just ignored that and did what I wanted to do, or what made me happy, or what kind of fulfilled my joy in that season, I feel like. I don't know if that answered your question fully, but
for the time that we have, that's sufficient.
Yeah.
Last question. You have immense theater background, and you're very comfortable in front of the camera. That's quite obvious. And so for some folks who aren't that comfortable in front of the camera, or who are not into theater, it would be easy to dismiss what you do based on, well, she's a theater girl, this comes naturally for her. And while I will admit that you have some natural gifts in this realm, I also know that the best theater people work like beavers, honing that skill to make it look easy. So, given your background, what things would you recommend to folks who want to be a little bit more comfortable in front of the camera that I know that you do before every single presentation, even if you don't think about it, it's just part of your routine now. So give me 2 or 3 steps before a presentation, here's what I do. Even a timeline maybe. 2 days out I do this or whatever. Just give us some practical skills here.
Well, I will say, I still get very, very nervous no matter how many shows I've done or whatever, how many speeches I've given. I was back there and I was like, I always get nervous. Nerves are good. It means that you care. That's what I always say. But I would say that just practicing is really important, because even if you think you're naturally gifted or like you'll be fine, like anyone can have moments where they forget or something goes wrong. So I would say just always practice, and just, I like to, especially with memorizing, I record myself and then I'll just put headphones in and listen to it even when I'm doing stuff, because it just automatically starts getting in your memory. When I had to memorize 8-minute speeches every week in high school, that's what I would always do. Because think about how it's really easy to memorize songs because you're listening to them over and over again. It's the same way with like memorizing. And then also, remind yourself that like you're just telling your story. I think we get really overwhelmed in all the technicalities of everything, but like when you just take a moment and you just breathe and you're like, okay, I'm just going to speak and I'm going to share my story. We would say that in speech all the time. That's what matters, is people just want to hear, what you have to say. I think that can be a really good way to just calm your nerves and just take the pressure off of it, and just, you're doing your thing, you're telling your story. Those would be my 2 biggest tips, I would say.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Jessie.
Of course.